This is Beyond Strides, the science and culture of human movement. I'm Andi, and I want to empower you through knowledge and challenge your own thinking. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Beyond Strides. Today, we're gonna cover the topic of Zone 2 running and also bust some myths about Zone 2 running. I will talk about what Zone 2 actually is and what all of the zones are and how to really determine which zone you're running in. Also, I will discuss what I think who Zone 2 is really beneficial for and who should not run in Zone 2, other than maybe a lot of influencers are propagating on Instagram and social media. And also I want to discuss what is actually better. Should we run by heart rate, by pace, by lactate level, or maybe even by power? Before we start, a little update from me. I'm recording this episode on Tuesday after the Berlin Half. We had an insane race weekend here in Berlin. So we kicked off the race weekend basically on Friday. We had a 2-day event day in our back-to-back gym together with Joy Run Collective and Nike. Nike was so nice to support this, and Joy brought a big group of BIPOC and Flinter people to our gym. We did on Friday, we did a little mobility and pre-race activation session. So obviously, especially for people who are not experienced in the gym, you would not necessarily give them a lot of weight to train with 2 days before race. But we did a lot of jumping, we did some hip and knee mobility, just some coordination work, and just to really prep them before the race. We did that on Friday. This was really cute. It was a very intimate group. So basically we did 2 slots with 2 groups, small and super nice groups. Had really nice conversations before and after. And on Saturday, then we kicked it off with a shakeout. So for those who don't know what a shakeout is, a shakeout run is basically like a 4 to 6 kilometer run the day before a race. And your shakeout is supposed to feel like shit. So if the shakeout feels bad and you're like, how the hell should I run 21 kilometer tomorrow? Then you're doing it right. And then your race probably will go fine. And this was also really cute. We had like maybe 40 people in the gym. I did a little warm up and then went on through Siegessäule and through to the Nike store. And after, I actually jumped back to the Berlin Braves HQ, another running crew here in Berlin, and did the warm-up for their shakeout run there. Usually the Berlin Braves shakeout is always huge because they do this homies half weekend with even a hood laps, which is like a big race around the streets of Berlin on the day before the half. It's like 40-yard dash, 400-meter race, so a very quick race. And we did like a little shakeout there as well. But after I went home, because I was super tired, my social battery basically ran out before the half even started. And maybe you remember from the last episode, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I wanted to run for fun. I wanted to have a lot of fun while running it, but I also wanted to run fast. And so you can run fast and do not have fun with it if you run so fast that you're basically destroying yourself. And I figured, okay, I could go for a new PB. Maybe it would have even been possible. I don't know. Because I just peaked for my last PB after training in the altitude. And I said, okay, either you can stress about it on race day and really take it serious, or just have fun with it, run fast and see where it goes. And I chose the second option because honestly, I think we all tend to take running way too serious all the time, which is definitely not sustainable. There are surely times where you should take running seriously, for example, in a certain training or at a certain competition, when you really want to achieve something. Taking running seriously is nothing bad. But if you do this constantly, all the time, and just tense up every time you think about running, that you have to hit certain splits, you have to do certain workouts, I think we are just losing the fun with it. And it's also just not sustainable, because if you and your body is tense all the time, physically, but also mentally, it's just really hard all the time. And then I think this is a recipe for burnout, to be honest. And I really want people to see running as a game. No one says, let's go play running, but actually running can be a game. So just go out, maybe even without a watch, just put a timer on your phone. And I don't know, see what you can see in the city. Maybe you will run to a new ice shop or a coffee place, or when you're on the trails, just explore the trails, dance up and down the trails, and really play the running game. And I promise you, you will find so much more joy within running. And leave the taking serious part to certain times where it's actually needed. So yeah, this is about the race day. I actually paced 2 women from the Bella Braves because they asked me what pace I want to run, and I said, okay, I want to start with a 4:50, I think, and then just see where it goes. And then they were like, oh yeah, I want to start with this pace as well. And they struggled with starting slower and then running faster, so running negative splits. And I said, okay, you can come with me and then we can see. Maybe we'll part at some point, maybe we don't. And this is what we did. We started with a 4:50, 4:45. I mean, GPS tracking is always a bit hard in big races because the signal's a bit disturbed. But I saw so many friends on the course. My best friend was at kilometer 8 and she was screaming. My parents were there. My father was there with a client of mine. And also my partner was there. Like, big shout out to Johan, actually, for basically biking the whole course with me. So I saw him maybe 10 times on the course. He did a really, really good job. And also it was really nice to see him. And actually he did a lot of videos. And on every video I was smiling. And I was like, okay, you actually achieved your goal. You ran to have fun. The best cheering zone, obviously, the Bella Braves cheering zone. They were so loud you could already hear them like 5 blocks away. And I knew, like, okay, the cheering zone is coming. In the end, we finished in 1 hour 39, and 2 girls wanted to run sub 1 hour 40, so we also achieved this goal. But I was so happy because I was like, okay, the time is actually solid, but I just had fun all the race. And it was so nice because every time I started to tense up and to like chase a good speed or good pace, I asked myself, hey, Andi, do you have fun right now? Not to frame it like Marie Kondo, but is this sparking joy? And every time my answer was no, I slowed down a little bit, looked around me, and just soaked up the energy in the moment. And the whole race was so wholesome. And I think I have never, ever been present in a race that much. And so this is just an idea for everyone, because if you look at your PBs and if you think about why do you want to run a PB, what are these 30 seconds or this minute less on a race gonna give you? And sometimes chasing PBs are definitely valid and have a point, but also very often the times are just not relevant. So yeah, this is my message to you, to take running less seriously. All right, so we're going to do this podcast now. And today afternoon, I actually going to have my first private mentorship call with a physio from London. She has her own physio space and she really wants to learn more about the coaching side of rehab and how to bridge the gap between rehab and training and how to prepare runners, how to get them from injury to running again. What kind of sets, what kind of reps, what kind of exercises. And so I started to prepare a little presentation because she sent me some initial questions. This is going to be the first call of a few calls. I don't know how many calls we will do. So the presentation basically will grow with her. And I'm really looking forward because through teaching others, you just learn so much. So this is going to be really fun and I'm really looking forward to it. Now, not only a coach for clients, for other people who want to learn to run better, but also for other coaches, which is great. Okay, let's jump into the topic of Zone 2. So why am I talking about this topic? I see many people online, but also offline, also runners approaching me who struggle to even run their true Zone 2 to keep the heart rate under a certain threshold. For example, their easy run pace would be like a 7-minute pace if they say, okay, this is relatively easy. But if they would look at their heart rate, their Zone 2 pace would be a 9:30 pace. And so I always wondered if this is the right approach to run way slower than you could run easily, especially if you're a beginner. And I think we have to look at this topic a bit more nuanced because you have seen it, we all have seen it on social media, every person, every influencer just copying each other and telling how Zone 2 is the new magic bullet for running. And I think this is actually massive bullshit. Zone 2 has a reason and Zone 2 is definitely helpful, but for who is it helpful and for who it's maybe not helpful? Let's discuss this. So Zone 2 training has become a buzzword in running communities, with influencers on social media. But how accurate is this information? And I want you to get a little bit of knowledge about this because knowing things might protect you from believing bullshit on the internet. Before we go into zone 2, I want to explain very briefly the 2 energy systems. So don't worry, this is not going to be a physiology podcast, so you don't have to be a doctor or a master in chemistry to understand this. But as I said, I believe if you have some basic knowledge and some basic understanding, this might protect you from believing bullshit on the internet. So let's dive in. You have 2 energy systems. So what is an energy system? Your body, your muscles need energy to contract. The way you move is basically if your muscle contracts. If you cannot contract your muscles because either your nerves are not firing or the muscle fibers can't contract, then no movement would be possible. In order to get a contraction within the muscle cell, you need ATP. ATP stands short for adenosine triphosphate. This is as complicated as it gets, I promise. I'm trying. And this is basically the only real energy source your body have. So when people say like carbs are energy, fats are energy. Yes, but they're like a pre-step before ATP. So carbs, fats, and sometimes even protein get changed into ATP. And this will happen with the energy system. You have first the aerobic energy system, and then secondly, the anaerobic energy system. So what's super important to understand is that never ever only one energy system is working alone. So sometimes you will see people saying, okay, this is an aerobic workout or this is a solely anaerobic workout. It's not, it's always a mixture, but the percentage of how much aerobic and anaerobic energy system you will use is dependent on how hard the effort is. So if you are running or cycling or walking in a relatively easy effort, you will be in an aerobic system. If you are sprinting or fighting or running to the bus, sprinting to the bus, you will switch to a more anaerobic dominant system. Still, your aerobic system will be working and supporting. So what is the aerobic system? So the aerobic system relies on oxygen to produce this energy, this ATP. And it's working quite slow. So it takes a long time to produce new ATP, but it's relatively consistent and you can keep it on basically forever. And so if the amount of oxygen you got through breathing, which is in your cell, more specific in the mitochondria, we all know mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So this is actually where all this ATP is being produced. And if this oxygen is enough for the effort you're currently doing, then you are using mainly the aerobic system. However, a little bit an anaerobic system is always happening and keeps things going. The anaerobic system consists actually of 2 systems. The one is using glycogen, so carbs, sugars basically. The other one is using creatine. I'm not going to go further into those 2 systems. You can really go deep down into this rabbit hole. If you're interested in this, I really encourage you to Google, do your own research. I'm super sure there are other podcasts explaining these way better. And both systems will give you energy relatively quickly, but will deplete also relatively quickly. So evolutionary wise, obviously it's important to have one system that keeps you going for longer distances. For example, if you're just walking through nature or, I don't know, hunting, but like running behind a cow, a bison, I don't know. But in case you face some danger, you want a lot of energy really quickly. And if you would not have the anaerobic system, most likely you would have died if a predator would came. And so evolutionary wise, it's super important that we have both systems, and we can also utilize both systems in training differently. So the good side about the anaerobic energy system is that the energy is produced really fast. But on the downside, you will have some byproducts. Byproduct number 1 are hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions are slightly acidic and will also make your muscles acidic. So the feeling of like this hurting muscles, hurting body, everything goes sour is actually not lactate, but it's hydrogen ions. Lactate was seen as a byproduct for a very long time. I also thought it's a byproduct up until a year ago or 2 years ago. But actually it's not a byproduct, but lactate can be reused for energy creation and travels through the bloodstream, through the whole body basically, to other muscles and even the brain. For those who want to read more about this, you can look up Lactate Shuttle by George Brooks. He introduced this concept in the 80s, I guess. So yeah, the concept is relatively old, I would say. Okay, those born before the 80s will hate me now. But I find it very interesting that just now, a few years ago, we actually started talking about this. So the real problem is not lactate, remember this. It's when the hydrogen ions build up faster than your body can clear them using oxygen. So that's why basically when you have a low effort, you have enough oxygen, because you remember the anaerobic system is also working in low efforts, just a bit less than the aerobic system, but you will have some byproducts building up. But because you have enough oxygen, those byproducts, hydrogen ions, and I believe there are surely other byproducts as well, will get eliminated by oxygen. As soon as your effort increases and the oxygen demand arises more than what you can deliver, these byproducts, so this hydrogen ions, will start ramping up until you feel like, okay, I can't go on anymore. This is actually your brain protecting you from over acidity within your body, because the sour the whole environment in your body gets, the more cells will start to die. And if your brain would not have the ability to say, okay, now please stop running for the sake of God, then you would basically kill yourself. So thank you, brain, for once again protecting us from our own stupidity. How is the aerobic and anaerobic system measured? So you might have heard of lactate measuring. And there we measure the rise of lactate during an effort. As I said, lactate is not the byproduct, so the real problem is hydrogen ions. If the rise of lactate and hydrogen and also the elimination is linear or not, honestly, I don't know. If someone knows, let me know. If you have a paper or any study you know about it, please send it to me. I must admit I didn't research that, so I don't know about this, but this is how the lactate measuring is done. So if you go to a running lab, or most of the running coaches can do this as well, you have a little lactate measuring device. It has like a little needle who gets a little bit of blood sample and analyzes this blood sample and will measure how many millimole per liter of lactate you can find in the blood. And how you would do a lactate measuring is you go on a treadmill, for example, or on a bike, or you can swim. We also did this in a pool. And you get the lactate and the heart rate before the whole exercise starts. And then you're going to start in a super, super easy effort pace and going to run 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, you have a 30-second break. Within this 30 second, your lactate is measured. So you get like a little poke in the finger or in the ear. And then the treadmill starts again, but slightly faster. After 3 minutes, stop, take the lactate, treadmill gets faster. And you basically do this so far until you say like, okay, I can't run any faster, if you do like the full measurement. Or if you just need zone 2, 3, and 4, you will stop after a certain lactate threshold, for example, after 4 or 6 millimole. What are the zones? So you have 5 zones. If you talk in running, in cycling, usually they talk about 7 zones, but let's talk about 5 zones now. Zone 1 is the easy zone, where your lactate is between 1 and 1.5 millimole. It's basically where you exist. Also, sometimes at the beginning of a measurement, the lactate is slightly higher and then dips. This means actually that you have enough carbs in your system, which is a good thing. So this is not a bad thing. If your lactate is like 1.8 in the beginning and then dips a little bit, it's actually a good thing. Zone 2, the magic one, is the aerobic zone, where the lactate is between 1.7 and 2.0 millimole. And here you can already see a linear rise of the lactate curve. So in zone 1, you don't have a rise. It's a relatively constant curve. Nothing changes. You could go on zone 1 basically forever if you eat sometimes a little bit. Zone 2, now your lactate will rise linearly, but very slowly. So also this you could go on for relatively long if you're trained. Zone 3 is your tempo zone. Lactate between 2.1 and 3.0 millimole per liter. And this is really good for race pace simulation, for longer threshold sessions. So a lot of people refer to zone 3 as the gray zone, the dead zone. You should not run in this zone. I think this is massive bullshit. I think most of the things who are said online, who are like, you should not do this ever, are bullshit, because you always have to look at things a bit more nuanced. But yeah, people on the internet usually don't do that. So zone 3, I really like, for example, very long threshold sessions, because this is also the zone you would run a marathon in, because you won't run a marathon in zone 4, at least not all the time. So simulating this definitely should have a time and place within your training program. Zone 4 is the anaerobic zone. So when the lactate is over 4 millimole. And now you can really see in the lactate curve an exponential rise. So this is where basically the pain starts. And zone 5, some people call it the VO2 max zone, although I think you build VO2 max also by easy running and by the combination of all zones, but other topic for other time. And this is basically the lactate, which is going over 6 millimole. So this is already pretty painful. So I'm coming from mid-distance running. I did modern pentathlon, but running was the mid-distance. We ran around 3 kilometers. So we trained regularly on relatively high lactate levels. And I remember when we did lactate testing up to the end point, up until you say, okay, I can't run anymore, I had lactate up to 15, 16 millimole. I also know of some bobsleigh sprinters and bobsleigh drivers who do lactate tasting who go even higher in the 20s, maybe even end 20s, 30s. I think this is insane to sustain this high of a level and to not shut down. It's also quite interesting because people who are marathon runners or ultra runners, they usually don't go into these high lactate zones and also can't tolerate them, obviously because their body is adapted to long distance running. So long distance running, mid distance running, and short distance running, which is sprinting essentially, has a very different profile in which energy systems you will use and which you will adapt more or less. When you do lactate testing, you usually map the lactate over the pace and the heart rate. So the curve is mapped over the pace. The faster it gets, usually your lactate rises, and then you will see the constant lactate curve, then the linear, and then the exponential rise. The issue we have with heart rate here, and this is really, really interesting and also very important to understand, is that heart rate is just a proxy. And it's influenced by external factors, including heat and humidity, dehydration, substances like coffee, and also nervous system stress. So in heat and humidity, for example, I went to Thailand. We went running very early in the morning. We tried to go very early in the morning. It had already 28 degrees and 85% of humidity. And we did like 18K easy runs. Basically, we were on a tiny, tiny island. And I've asked myself, how long would it be to run around the whole island? Well, 18 kilometers. And so we did like little long runs there. And my heart rate was all the time at 175, 178, because it was just so hot and my body was not acclimatized to the heat and humidity. However, I definitely was not in zone 3 or 4. Maybe early beginning of zone 3, but not where the lactate curve of my measuring would indicate that I should be. When you're dehydrated, you have less plasma in your blood volume. The other point is dehydration. So when you're dehydrated, you have less blood plasma, so your blood is basically thicker, and your heart has to beat faster to deliver this thicker and more dense blood through the body. This means that your heart rate again goes up. This does not mean necessarily that the lactate goes up. So there's a little bit of a problem because lactate and heart rate are mapped together like there would be a linear relationship to them, which is always the same, but it's actually not. Further, if you drink coffee, obviously your heart rate rises. And also if you have nervous system stress, meaning poor sleep, poor nutrition, just mental stress, your heart rate will increase through your more active nervous system or your sympathetic nervous system, which also does not mean that you will run in a higher lactate level. And this is really important to understand because this is why running by heart rate zones do not really help you if you don't know your lactate level. There are actually 3 issues I have with running by heart rate zones. So the first issue I just told you, because the heart rate is just a proxy and it is very influenced by external factors. The second one is that the heart rate zones, most of the people determine their heart rate zones by getting a formula, which there are different formulas. The most basic one is 220 minus your age. This would mean, for me, I'm 27, that my max heart rate would be 193. I know that my max heart rate right now is around 205. I always have had a higher heart rate. When I did pentathlon, my max heart rate was even 215. However, for example, my partner, he has a very, very low heart rate. He is not an endurance athlete, and his heart rate regularly goes under 35. I think his max heart rate is 170, maybe 100. Yeah, something like this. According to the calculation, he must be 50 years old, which he is not. So again, determining your heart rate zones, because the heart rate zones are then determined by percentage of the maximum heart rate, is very risky to failure, because all these formulas are just formulas and won't necessarily work for you. The third issue I have with running by heart rate is that most of the people don't even use a heart rate monitor to monitor their heart rate, but actually their watch. So Apple Watches, Garmin's, every smartwatch can monitor your heart rate, but they can read the heart rate only on one point. The heart rate monitor has several points, and then with an algorithm, they basically calculate the difference between how the impulse of the heart basically travels through the body. And what I want to say is that just measuring your heart rate just with a watch can be very inaccurate, and you can have plus and minus 10 heartbeats more or less than what your watch tells you. So the whole concept of running by heart rate has just so much potential for errors that for me, it just does not make sense. And I know many people who approach me who are like, hey, I'm trying to stay within this and this zone of my heart rate, but it just makes me stressed out about running. And this is not what running should be like. Running should not stress you out about heart rates, especially if you're not earning money with running. So ask yourself, am I making money with this? If the answer is yes, I'm pretty sure you have lactate testing on board and a way better way to measure things. If the answer is no, then just please stop looking at your watch and your heart rate. And so for beginners, actually, I think they should not look at the heart rate. Most of the beginners do not have a lactate testing or a lactate measuring device. And stop stressing yourself. I think for most of the beginners, running by pace should be better than running by heart rate. Obviously, you will have maybe days where the pace will feel hard, days where the pace will feel easy. But let's go back to what I said in the beginning of this podcast, that I think we take running all way too seriously. It's just not relevant what heart rate you have while running a certain pace. If you are running beginner, your focus should be on getting consistency in your runs. So just getting out 2 or 3 times a week to slowly, progressively overload your runs. So don't start with a 10K and then be in bed with pain for like a week, but really slowly work your way up. And you should have fun doing it. You should find the joy and fun in running. And I promise you, if you constantly look at your watch, you won't have any joy. So what are then the true benefits of zone 2? So when running zone 2, the body is not flooded with high levels of lactate or hydrogen ions, which are high stress for the body, but the body is running in a sustained low intensity stress. And this sustained low intensity stress triggers the production of more mitochondria within the cell, which means in the end more ATP. So the more mitochondria you have, the better you will get in producing ATP on low efforts, and the better your base will be. So this is actually when people talk about building the base, this is what we talk about. And zone 2 training works because it sends a clear signal to your body, hey, we need to get better at using oxygen. And that message activates a molecular switch, which basically tells your cell to build more mitochondria. And as I said, more mitochondria means more efficient energy, better endurance, faster recovery. But there are 2 problems if you are new to running. So first, if you are new to running, you don't have the physiological benefits and adaptation. So you don't have a bigger heart volume, which can pump the same amount of blood per minute with less pumps, which means in the end less BPM. So if you want to pump a certain volume of blood width is just bigger, you don't need so many pumps. And if you are new to running, you also don't have the adaptations of more mitochondria and more efficient oxygen use yet, because this just takes time to build. The second problem is that you don't have the biomechanical adaptations. So this means first that you don't have strong enough bones, ligaments, and muscle to sustain long zone 2 training without any overuse injuries, because the big error I see in beginner runners is that they start running And after a few weeks, their muscle adapt really, really fast, but their bones and ligaments are not adapted. They need months to even years to get denser and thicker and stronger. And so they ramp up their volume with tendons and bones which are not ready yet and then get injured. And the second biomechanical adaptation is a good and efficient running form. Running form consists of rhythm, anticipation of the ground, the ability to push the ground away, the tendon stiffness, which is super important for good running efficient form. And if you don't have the physiological and the biomechanical adaptations, I think you are chasing with zone 2 training like a 1% without even having the 99% before that. So that's why I think beginners should learn to run consistently first and also work on their running technique, because the improvement they will get from doing that outweighs the improvement of running a zone 2 in a pace which is basically slower than your walking pace would be, because running is a dynamic sport and you need a certain pace in order to have a good running form. And just running so ridiculously slow that your heart rate stays under a certain threshold will just fuck up your whole technique. I promise you that, especially if you're new to running. I'm talking about running beginners right now. And that's why I would say running beginners should not run in zone 2 or try to run in zone 2. However, I still think that everyone should spend time in zone 2. But running is a hard sport, and if you're new to running, you won't be able to stay in zone 2. So find a bike, go for a swim or like a power hike or walk. You will be in zone 2, and this will give you all the benefits without destroying your running form or your running technique, and also without stressing you so much and running and looking at the heart rate all the time. So where's the whole buzz around zone 2 then? So first, of course, zone 2 is important to build the engine, to build more mitochondria. So everything I said. But we also have obviously a lot of studies who talk about the training benefits and that zone 2 training will make you a better runner. However, those studies are done at trained or sub-elite and elite athletes, and mostly in men. And those people have already the set adaptations, which I talked earlier about. And what I also ask myself is, because most of the studies are conducted on men, how good is zone 2 training for women then? I actually did not do any research on this. I think there are a few studies also on women. If someone has dug into this and knows the research, let me know. Shoot me a message. I would love to know. But zone 2 is basically really, really good because you can run a lot. You can run big efforts. Within the week, you can run big volume without destroying yourself. Zone 2 allows to do a lot more volume without having the big issue of fatigue and long recovery times. So I would say for trained individuals who are running more than 30 or 40 kilometers a week, zone 2 training becomes really important, because you just can't run 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers a week constantly in zone 3. If you would run it in zone 3, and if you would not look at recovery, but just the running in zone 3, I believe that you will get pretty good, a pretty fast runner relatively fast. But running in zone 3 will mean that your pace is increasing. And if the pace increases, then the force that is applied at each step at the ligaments and tendons and the whole body will increase. And higher repeated force is linked to higher tissue damage, meaning higher damage in your muscle, in your tendons, in your bones. And this means longer recovery times. But if you really want to run 50, 60, 70 or even more kilometers a week, you don't have so much recovery time, because you have to run every day or to run even twice a day. And so you are diminishing your recovery and running on a non-recovered body, which will lead to burnout, stress fractures, relatively fast. And that's why zone 2 running is so important for this population. So for people who really want to run a lot, 30, 40 plus kilometers, zone 2 running should be a big part of your training, because it just allows for more running volume without the increased recovery time. The same thing is also why the Norwegian method works. So everyone thinks the Norwegian method is running double threshold sessions in a day, but actually the Norwegian method is not about the double threshold sessions. Yes, they do that, but what they actually do is they do a big amount of zone 2 running. Those people run 100 140, 160 kilometer a week, which is insane. And they can actually run so long zone 2, and their zone 2 is actually really fast. I think their zone 2 is faster than my zone 4. But they can do this because they have all the adaptations to be able to sustain this big training without overtraining. So when you look at those people training Norwegian methods, those are runners who are running for years. So their bones, their ligaments, their tendons, everything is super adapted. Their heart is bigger. They have more blood volume to running. And so if you are new to running, please don't try to do the Norwegian method after a year of running, because this is just a recipe for burnout. Those people are really just a different kind of breed of runners. I could not sustain that as well. In conclusion, if you are a beginner and running maybe 2 times a week, 5 to 10K, zone 2 training might help you if you do this on a bike, but you will benefit way more of running faster, maybe even do an interval session with really fast running speeds, like for 400 meters or 200 meters, and work on your stride, on your running form, running efficiency, and just do like early zone 3 easy runs, then creeping in a pace which is basically slower than your walking pace. You still should get zone 2 training in though, but you can do this on a bike or in the pool or just walking fast. If you want to run high mileage and you're an experienced runner and you have been running for months, years, probably better years to be honest, then stick to high amount of zone 2 training, because this will help you to run a lot of volume without adding the high stress and the high recovery times. And so a little practical guide for new runners who have maybe seen running now on social media and they want to start running and they see all these people running in zone 2 and obsessing over it. Stop obsessing over zone 2. To be honest, if you are a beginner runner, you don't even need a running watch because I think it has big potential to stress you out and just to take away all the joy for running. Because if you're truly beginner, it's just about getting out there consistently and have fun during it. And what I would say is you're going to run once or twice a week in a pace where you could hold a conversation. It does not have to be an hour podcast monologue like I'm doing right now, but just a comfortable conversation. Either you go out with friends anyways and you just yap through the whole run, or you can call your parents or friends or whatever and have a phone call on your run. Modern headphones can do this as well, really well, because I usually do this very often. I go for runs and call my grandparents or my parents. Further, you should also have an interval session once a week. And what I like to do with beginners, just to add some variety to the training, is to do in the first week a short interval session. So where you have very short intervals, but at a very high intensity. So people start to run in paces they never run, just to see how this pace feels like. Because if new runners run very, very fast, all other paces will seem quite slow and easy to them. So this would be an interval session with 400 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters, more like a stride session. And you could also add basically a good plyometric warm-up, some running drills to this to really get into the rhythm and the whole skill set you will need as a runner. The other interval session, the second week, should be like a longer interval session. For example, I would start for beginners with 1 minute or 90 seconds intervals in a pace which is relatively hard, but they should be able to say 1 or 2 sentences running it. So it should not be so hard that you're dead after the first one. And you could work your way up there. So you start with 1 minute or 90 seconds, and then you work your way up to 2 minutes, then to 3 minutes, then to 4 minutes. Be reasonable with the progression, so don't progress too fast. But you can alternate those 2 track sessions or interval sessions. So you do week 1, a very short, intense interval session. Week 2, a longer, more extensive interval session, and you basically just alternate them. This is how I would go for beginner runners. And so for advanced runners who are running 20, 30, 40, even more kilometers a week, depending on how you structure it. But I would say who run more than 4 times a week, you will need to utilize zone 2 training, because you will also make huge gains from zone 2 training. However, what's important, you can either run in zone 2, but you can also still do cross training in zone 2. So for example, swimming, cycling, power walking or walking up a hill if you live in a hilly neighborhood. And so, for example, when I did modern pentathlon and when we trained, I went 3 or 4 times running a week. And 2 of those runs were easy runs, but I always ran them with the guys. And it was more like a tempo run, I would say, like a comfortable tempo run, but definitely not zone 2. And then 2 runs were interval sessions. So we had 1 extensive interval session and 1 intensive interval session. It was mid-distance training, so the focus was on speed work. But I basically never ran in zone 2. However, I went swimming 3 times a week, which was mostly zone 2. Sometimes you would also have some intervals, but in swimming, usually your heart rate is just way lower than in running. And I got still really, really fast, although I almost never ran zone 2. And so if you want to run, you can do your zone 2 runs. But I actually think that maybe exchanging a run with a bike ride will give you just way more time to recover, because in biking or swimming, you just don't have the impact. So that's why cross training like biking or swimming or rowing, if you like rowing for an hour in the gym, because you get to spend a lot of time in zone 2 without the actual impact. However, as I said, the heart rate zones are just a proxy. And even for advanced runner, I would recommend to run by pace. So usually they would know their easy pace, and sometimes the easy pace is 15 seconds slower, sometimes faster, because this really depends on how you feel on the day. In the end, it doesn't matter. And then if you, for example, prepare for a race and you know your race pace, which is a goal you set in a smart way, maybe you remember the last episode about goal setting. So it's not like a Delulu pace, but a pace which is actually reasonable. Then you also know your 10K pace or your threshold pace or your half marathon pace or your 5K pace, and you can just work with that. And to be honest, even if you're advanced and very advanced, I don't think that you have to determine your pace by 5 seconds. It's actually irrelevant. It's just important that sometimes you run very slow, sometimes a bit harder but for longer, and sometimes really hard but for really short. The moment where it gets really important is when you are a sub-elite or elite level of runner, and there the whole training programming is obviously way more dedicated, because it's really about certain splits, certain times. You run a really big volume, so you really have to be careful with running pace, how fast you run all the time because of the structural damage, but also with the buildup of byproducts, because also this means high stress for the body. So building up a lot of byproducts all the time will also just set you up for fatigue. And this population usually has coaches with lactate measuring devices. I know a lot of semi-elite runners who actually have their own lactate measuring device and who measure between every interval or every second, because the little measuring things are very expensive. But they measure before an easy run and after the easy run, just to make sure they were really in the lactate zone. And so again, I come back to, we have to take running like seriously. It doesn't matter if your pace is 5 seconds faster or slower, except if you are a sub-elite runner. But please ask yourself, am I really sub-elite? Or do I like the imagination of me being sub-elite? Because most of the times, those two are 2 different things. So thank you for listening to me rambling on about Zone 2 training. I tried to summarize everything relatively quick and fast. The topic can go even further in how to create good training programs depending on your race. So obviously, if you race for an ultra, you would spend more time in Zone 2 running, because this is also the race pace you're in. If you race for 800 meters or 3 kilometers, for example, mid-distance or short distance even, you would spend more time in other zones. This means that Zone 2 training is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So again, don't believe the hype on social media. And runners should tailor the training based on individual fitness levels and also goals. If you like this podcast, share your thoughts on Zone 2 training by reaching out on Instagram at the Andi. And I also want to do an Q&A episode soon. So if you have any questions about this podcast, the last podcast, or any topic really, just put your questions in, send me an email or just a message on Instagram, and I'm going to make sure to include them in the Q&A episodes. Thank you for listening. Hear you soon. Bye bye.